Third, they attacked targets in the Egyptian cities of Port Said, Port Fawad, Cairo, etc. The Egyptian Air Force was unable to fight air power of Great Britain and France. Because Egypt was receiving modern aircraft such as the MiG-15 from Russia, but there was still a severe shortage of trained pilots. Because of this weakness of the Egyptians, the Allies overpowered them. By November 1st night, 200 Egyptian planes had been destroyed in just 2 days. Most of them were bombed by Allied planes while standing in hangars. British planes also hit 2 oil depots in Port Said, which caught fire and clouds of smoke hung over the city for several days. The British raining missiles on Egypt had Nasser's rock and roll written on them, meaning it is death music for the Egyptian president. The Allied planes disabled Egypt's vital weapon, the Air Force, at start of the war. The Egyptian troops who were fighting Israel in the Sinai Desert had lost the support of their planes. Israel was getting support from British and French planes along with its Air Force. This caused heavy losses to the Egyptian tank forces in the Sinai Desert. Bombing by the Allied aircraft and Israeli tanks on the ground barred their way, and they all pushed the Egyptian forces back towards the Suez Canal. By November 3, Israelis held Al Arish, the Gaza Strip, Mitla Pass, and Ras El Nakb. On the Gaza coast, the Egyptian guards fought the Israelis, but they failed. Many of their soldiers were killed and others were captured. There were also reports that in the south of Gaza, Jewish forces had massacred Palestinians in Khan Yunis and other areas. Like land and air war, Egypt suffered losses in naval war as well. An Egyptian ship Ibrahim I attacked the Israeli port of Haifa. It was confronted by a French ship in the harbor. After firing at the enemy for some time, this ship retreated. However, 2 Israeli warships gave chase and forced its crew to surrender. The ship was captured by the Israelis and added to the Jewish naval force under the name INS Haifa. A key Israeli target in the Sinai Desert was the port of Sharm el-Sheikh. The Jewish forces besieged and attacked it vigorously on the night of November 4. However, the Egyptian army failed this attack and repelled the Israeli army. The next morning, on November 5, the second Israeli attack proved successful and the Egyptian army surrendered. After the bombing of the Allies, Gamal Abdel Nasser realized that now the armies of these countries will come down to occupy the Suez. So the Egyptian forces blocked the canal by sinking about 40 ships and boats, etc. That is, this canal is temporarily blockaded for global use. On November 5, British and French paratroopers landed around Port Said in Port Fawad. Among them, some British forces were flown to their targets by helicopters. It was the first time the British Army was airdropping its troops into the battlefield. British and French forces seized airfields and important military positions in Egypt. After that, these forces advanced towards these 2 cities. The Egyptian forces were too little to defend the 2 cities, and they also had insufficient weapons. Tanks in particular were almost non-existent. And the weapons needed to counter the tanks were also insufficient. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, to fight the Allies, declared it a people's war. The Egyptian soldiers were instructed to fight in plain clothes instead of uniforms so that the world would know all the Egyptians were united in defense. So, the coalition forces that had entered Port Said in Port Fawad and faced street-to-street resistance. The Egyptian army and people were fighting the Allies, however they were not winning. Soon at least 1,000 civilians were killed along with the soldiers. Numerous buildings were also destroyed. By the evening of November 6, British and French forces occupied these cities. Now they began to advance along both sides of the Suez Canal. Meanwhile, resolutions were tabled in the UN Security Council for a ceasefire, but these 2 countries also vetoed the resolutions. The complete defeat of Egypt was written on the wall, but on this point, 2 powers greater than Britain and France intervened. These powers were Soviet Russia and the United States. Khrushchev, the Soviet leader and friend of Egypt, threatened Britain and France that if they did not withdraw their troops from Egypt, he would launch a nuclear attack on London and Paris. He also threatened to send a volunteer force to Egypt. Radio Moscow aired an appeal by the Egyptian government to send volunteers. After this, a large number of reserve Soviet officers applied to the Egyptian embassy that they were ready to go to Egypt. and fight. How many of them went, we do not have any idea, but America, an ally of Britain and France, was also closely watching the situation. The United States warned Soviet Russia that the threat of a nuclear attack would worsen matters, so it should be avoided. Rather, Russia should refrain from interfering in this matter, that is, should not try to send volunteers and others. However, after this warning, the US also came down harsh on Britain and France. American President Eisenhower was very angry that these two countries did not take America into confidence in this war. The US president said angrily in a televised address that the US was neither consulted nor informed in advance. We do not accept the use of force to resolve international conflicts. Then the US threatened Britain, France, and Israel with economic sanctions. It was a big blow for Britain and France because they thought that America was with them in this war. But America was threatening them with sanctions instead. Britain desperately needed a loan from the IMF to get out of the financial crisis. And this loan could only be secured with American support.